All right, so I'm trying something new today. I'm going to do a reading on some channeling messages that I received. I've been inspired and encouraged by my wife Sarah, who's been watching tons of these energy update videos where channelers receive messages about what's coming up in the next weeks or months, and then offer their kind of interpretation of what messages they've received. So that you can pick out whatever resonates with you and so on. So I want to do something kind of like that, but I'm going to add in tarot, and my relationship is not with aliens or light beings or something like that, but I maintain a daily Hecate practice and have for years. And so when I got turned on to this idea by Sarah, I just figured I would go to Hecate and see what messages that she wanted to send, since I work most closely with her. So I asked, what message would you like to send through me today? And I got back the message, and this is pretty crazy. This is very detailed, and it kind of came out all at one time. And some of this I didn't even know actually in advance, and I had to Google it to make sure that it was true. But the message was peace. Peace comes from inner peace. So like outer peace comes from inner peace. It cannot be forced, it must be found. Mined from your depths like precious metals, sifted out of the dirt, refined and separated from the muddy experience of life. When it's covered by all the dirt, it is easy to miss, it's invisible, but once separated and polished, it begins to shine and can be put to use. Gold and other metals like silver are conductive. They're not only pretty, but also functional with unique properties. When extracted and put to use, they conduct with almost no resistance, which means that they can be used reliably when other connectors, other kinds of conductive materials, will break or fail. Gold can handle the extreme charge when other man-made connectors cannot. Gold is heavenly and carries the sun's light. This vitality it projects overcomes resistance, and this is the metaphor or the energy that's needed right now. Positivity against the overwhelming resistance of the current time. So what I take that to mean, because I just kind of wrote that down, that's why it's a little choppy. I just wrote it out based on what was coming through me in the channeling experience. But what I take that to mean is that we will get outer peace in the world by finding inner peace within ourselves, and that it's like when you go looking for precious metals, it's buried deep in the earth, and you get it out in chunks and little bits, and you have to clean them off and melt them down and pull them together. It takes some refining before gold can be useful, or silver or whatever. And in particular, gold reflects the sun's light, esoterically. And so this vitality that it projects overcomes the resistance in other people, I guess, in the world around us. So when we're faced with situations like we have today, this week, going on, all year, honestly, with the increasing amount of war across the world, we don't get to peace. We can't bomb our way to peace, right? And we can't choose sides and assume that winning is going to be some kind of long-term victory. War only brings more war. So instead we have to go inside, because this isn't something that just can happen overnight. We can't just all decide. We're not going to all just decide to be at peace. We're going to have to live with a world that is not at peace, but then find our inner peace in all of this turmoil and bring it to light so that other people can see that example, and that is desperately needed right now. So I thought I would do some readings to follow up on that, to get a little bit more detail. I like to do this kind of 1-2 punch thing where I do the channeling and then also some tarot reads, because it helps to vet and validate, the experience, helps me translate it and interpret it a little bit, and then make it more practical so I can kind of create a dialogue and be like, well, how do I do that? So let's figure that out. How do we find that inner peace? Let's come up with a good question here. Let's start with the obvious one, maybe. How do you find your inner peace when there is so much suffering in the world and it's distracting? So let's make that the question. How do we find our inner peace when there is so much suffering in the world and it's distracting? Two of Pentacles, Five of Swords, and Six of Swords. So not really surprised to see the swords here. We're talking about conflict and such. Five of Swords, in this case, I'm reading just off of the image on the card here, but we have these three different sides. They look like they're trying to figure out how to do battle or trying to figure out what's going on. They're in a state of a bit of chaos there. And then the Six of Swords, this is a bridge, right? It's a bridge probably between old and new. You got some butterflies flying across right here. But the passageway itself is conflict. Like we have to move through the conflict, I think, with like higher aspirations, right? We have to be moving through this conflict with something in mind rather than just more conflict. And maybe trying to balance that out, right? To have sort of a de-escalatory energy as well. And the Two of Pentacles is just about balance, like finding some kind of balance. So let's see if we can put that together. It's about balancing ourselves. So this is one individual here who's sitting on this precarious Humpty Dumpty wall and then balancing the two sides of themselves, I would assume, while everything else is going crazy in the world. And, you know, these almost look like they connect this, right? Five of Swords, Six of Swords here. So I love this deck because of this, but they have contiguous imagery within the suits. And then it almost makes a big map that all looks the same, but it's like comic strips, sort of, where each of the suits have their own story. So this is a conflict that's going on and a bit of a clusterfuck, it looks like, before there's some kind of a more orderly transition that's going somewhere. You can see everything is kind of leaning in this way too. But this guy, he's just in a completely different setting. You know, most of us are removed from the conflict, most of us watching this video anyway. And here we are trying to like choose a side or something. And so it's about, not even about balance, it's about not choosing a side, right? We find balance in not choosing a side. While this, probably this thing this week in particular, sorts itself out, but also just kind of conflict on this wider global scale. We're going to be going through this and for some time. And it's potentially necessary. Like all conflict is bad, obviously, but there's some kind of a global purging that's happening right now where we're working out these violent impulses in ways that I think most of us can't really do anything about. And so when we can't do anything about it, the point is to retain our perspective and to not pick a side. So that's how we find our inner peace, is by not picking a side. And picking a side, we're going to like, you know, get angry at the other. And so by avoiding the anger with the other, then that, I guess, gives us the space to find it internally, which makes sense. Okay, so that's the first reading. What other things do we want to know? That talks about, you know, finding this inner gold and using that vitality that it projects, which this, to be fair, is like a nice golden glowing kind of card too, right? To overcome the resistance. So I mean, it's a practical application of that. Or maybe the question is, how does that help, or how long is that going to take to make a meaningful difference? Let's go with that. How long is it going to take? Or, yeah, it'd be interesting to see what we get back out of that. How long is it going to take for us just projecting our inner peace to turn into outer peace? How long is it going to take for us projecting our inner peace to turn into outer peace, peace in the world? I'll do a 5-card reading now. That's encouraging. There you go, right in the middle. It's that Six of Swords again showing up. Wheel of Fortune. So it's going to take some time. Man, there's a lot of travel imagery going on here. Like, I don't know how well you can see that, but there's a guy, the hermit here, going over the bridge under the moonlight by himself off there in the distance. We have some water to cross. Maybe some water under the bridge that will eventually come. The Death card is not really surprising. I mean, obviously we're watching it happen in terms of real physical, material death, but also in that kind of subjective and experiential way, in a symbolic sense. We have the letting go of a lot of different things that's necessary before we can make changes. And so it's going to be a long journey where we're on our own. We're going to experience some loss. There's going to be some real death and some symbolic death. And then right here at the center point is that transition that came up in the last reading. And then the Page of Wands, which it's a little hard to see the outline here, but there's your page, and he's kind of like it's like squiggly in the sky, but he's moving in that same direction. So you have some, left to right movement going on here, which then finally ends in the Wheel of Fortune. So the Page of Wands is us kind of not really knowing what we're doing. And that's not quite the Fool, right? Like the energy of the Fool is cheerful and happy, going off into the unknown. This is not really knowing how to do the work that's ahead, but being faced with it anyway. And then the Wheel of Fortune, these things are going to go round and round for a bit. This is always a waiting game. That's usually what Wheel of Fortune means to me, is it's like this is going to take some time, and it probably depends on some things. There's a fight here between a big serpent and then also it looks like maybe a peacock, a white peacock. It's interesting. But there's definitely two sides that are at war in a yin and yang kind of way, like they're finding a new balance. So maybe we can read this sort of literally, like we're halfway through this transition. Maybe we can hope that it means like halfway through from 2012, so another 10, 12 years, something like that. Maybe we're on the other side of it, but not anytime very soon is what I'm taking from this. Okay, what else do we want to know? We'll do one more on this subject. What would be helpful? How about the practical question of like, if we got to find the gold, that's one thing. That takes some patience. That takes some not taking sides. But what about refining that? How do we refine the inner peace that we find so that it can be consolidated and used to inspire the world around us to peace? Let's do that. All right, so how do we refine that inner peace to create external peace? What do we have to do before that's going to work? How do we refine our inner peace to create external peace in the world? All right, so 8 of Chalices. This is a card of dreams and potentially sometimes illusions, but in this case I'm reading it more as dreams. This is like a pretty positive read. You have the 10 of Chalices here. It's 10 of Cups. That's fulfillment and heart's desire and being with the people that you love and care for you and so forth. It's a good card, happy card. It's a sunset, really pretty. A few folks hanging out in a tree with, I'm not really sure what's going on there, a bunch of stuff in the tree. But that's a very scenic card and obviously very happy. It's got some of the same kind of like red but not angry energy that's coming off of this one, and then swirls eventually into the Empress, which is a card about comfort. It's a very Venusian card, right? Comfort, joy, love, nurturing, coming from that place where you're okay so you can take care of others. So yeah, it's like dream, find fulfillment, and nurture yourself and others. It's a hard thing to do right now, for sure. But like the first reading said, how do we do that while there is so much suffering happening in the world? And that's by separating ourselves from the conflict that's happening. We're not in the conflict. We're not a part of the conflict. Again, most of us watching this video, we may have ties to it. There may be cultural or geographical or other things that make this part of your life more than it's part of my life, for example. But if you're not on the ground, if you're not committing acts of violence right now, then not taking a side is the best thing that we can do while this ugliness is happening. I want to say even like working itself out. I'm not sure anything positive is happening right now. But if we step back from this particular conflict that's happening this week and think about this more, look at what's happening other places in the world, or look just kind of how the entire world is pro-conflict right now. If we can become anti-conflict, that's objectively a good thing. And the only way to be anti-conflict, which is effectively to say anti-war, is to be anti-all war, to be anti-violence. And I don't mean defending yourself. I mean acts of aggression upon innocent people, primarily. There's no way for us to be true to ourselves and our souls and cheer on that kind of violence. We may bear witness to it, but I think not taking a side is how we retain our sanity, how we retain our sense of balance. And then as we find that sense of balance, we can find within ourselves dreams, fulfillment, comfort, and then extend that to others. So that's what Hecate wanted me to tell you for this week. I hope that's been interesting. It's definitely interesting for me. I know when I do channeling like this, when I get spirit messages in general, one of my go-to ways, my primary way of making sure I'm not just talking to myself, talking about how I feel about something, is that some element of it is surprising to me, like I wouldn't have come up with it myself, hadn't thought about it like that, or externally verifiable, another way, but then something that doesn't sit with me perfectly well because I have some kind of hang up about it. And I think this checks all three of those boxes. I mean, I definitely have some hang-ups about seeing injustice and not wanting to take some side or to become angry about it or to react in some way that doesn't come from the heart, certainly. I received verifiable information that I didn't know or that I don't remember knowing, certainly, talking about how precious metals have a low resistance conductivity, that they can conduct under greater amounts of thermal energy, the heat, under the heat in situations that we can't use other metals. And so I thought it was really interesting. I stopped channeling immediately to Google that because I was like, really? Is that true? And it was. So it's very interesting when that happened. What was the other one that I said? Well, anyway, yeah, it checked all of the boxes. It's not something I would have come up with. Yeah, there you go. It's not something I would have come up with. This isn't really what I would typically say. I would definitely say we shouldn't pick sides. But the bit about how finding this inner balance lets us dig deep to find peace within us that we can extend to others, I definitely hadn't considered it like that, and not with that metaphor, certainly. It was a bit hard to interpret at first, actually. It was a little bit choppy, and it didn't make sense to me at first, but then once I did my Googling and I had thought about it for a minute, I kind of put that together. So then this reading on top of it, I think, definitely confirms, come from a place of love, come from a place of hope and mutual hope and fulfillment, right? Like real equality. You see a lot of soft, loving energy in these cards, lots of cups and empress and so forth. So coming from a heart-centered place. And so much is saying that right now. Other people that I'm listening to, they're doing channeling that Sarah's telling me to listen to anyway. Gordon White's been talking a lot about heart-centered practices. Anyway, it's something that's happening in the world right now. The more violent the world becomes, the more that we need to go internally and find that inner peace. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think about this. This is a bit experimental, and I will hopefully, if it works, if people like it, keep doing this on maybe a weekly basis and see where we take it from there. Cheers.